What if the price of power was more than you could ever imagine? What if, in your desperation to escape a life of struggle, you unknowingly sold your soul to something darker? In a village where hope seemed as distant as the stars, one woman's journey from the depths of despair to fleeting success, you'd reveal the terrifying cost of ambition. Salima, a poor woman from Zango, dreamed of a better life. One without hunger, one without the crushing weight of poverty. But what if achieving that dream meant losing everything else? As Salima rose from the ashes, a mysterious woman named Kai appeared, offering an opportunity too good to refuse. The exchange was simple: collect items from the villagers, and in return, wealth beyond measure. But what Salima didn't know was that the price of her newfound fortune would come at a cost far greater than money. The village she once knew, the people she had grown up with, would all be swept into a web of dark magic, their lives forever changed by the consequences of her choices. Join us as we dive into the world of Salima, a woman caught between the light of her hopes and the darkness of her decisions. This is a story of ambition, deception, and the battle for redemption. It's a journey that will make you question: how far would you go to change your life? And is it ever worth it when the price is too high? In the small, dusty village of Zango, Salima's existence was a silent echo of hardship. She walked through the narrow paths with her head low, her body clad in rags, the remnants of clothes she had scavenged from the refuse of others. No one looked her way. To the villagers, she was nothing more than a shadow, a cursed soul they avoided, fearing she might bring misfortune. The children would whisper and run when they saw her coming. Her life was a cycle of endless toil, fetching water from the distant well, washing clothes for the wealthy, and praying that the day would bring something to fill the gnawing hunger in her belly. Yet, despite the crushing weight of her circumstances, Salima never lost sight of one thing: hope. Hope was a fragile thread she clung to, even as the others in the village moved forward in their lives, creating families, living in homes full of laughter and warmth. Salima's heart often ached when she saw these women, their lives so full, so complete. She watched with a mix of longing and envy as they carried their children, shared meals with their husbands, and gathered together in their homes. Her heart broke a little each time she saw them, wondering why she couldn't have that life too. But then, after the ache, there was always that quiet whisper in her mind, a promise to herself that one day things would change. It had to. As she worked tirelessly under the burning sun, Salima's thoughts often wandered to the life she had never known, the one that seemed just out of reach. She imagined herself wearing bright clothes, living in a sturdy house, perhaps even having children of her own. It felt like a distant dream, but somehow it felt attainable. Every drop of sweat she shed, every aching muscle, was a step toward that future. And so she pressed on, even when it seemed like the world around her had forgotten she existed. But even in her solitude, there was something stirring in the air, something that would change the course of her life forever. It was the quiet moments that weighed most heavily on Salima. As the sun set behind the mountains, she would sit by the edge of the village, gazing at the flickering lights from the homes of others. The laughter she heard seemed to mock her. She had no family to return to, no one to share her burdens with. Her world was defined by the grind of survival, by the sheer will to make it through another day. Her stomach growled, reminding her of the little food she had, and yet she found herself wishing for something more, something beyond the endless cycle of work. In those moments, Salima's gaze would fall upon the women of the village, the ones who had what she longed for. They walked with ease, their clothes fresh and clean, their faces glowing with the warmth of a life well lived. They had husbands who cared for them, children who called them mother. Their homes were full of life, of laughter, and Salima, though grateful for the work that kept her alive, couldn't help but envy their abundance. She had nothing but the tattered clothes on her back and the aching in her heart, yet in her eyes, a spark of determination remained. She would not give up. Each day, Salima wondered how they managed it all, their seemingly perfect lives, their comfort. She couldn't help but feel the sting of being left behind, of watching as others prospered while she toiled without end. But deep inside, Salima held on to a belief, one that kept her going. She believed that life had more to offer, even if she couldn't yet see how. There was a fire within her, a drive to overcome the shadows that clung to her life. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered to herself, "One day, things will change." Little did she know, the change she so desperately longed for was already beginning to take shape, and it would come from the most unexpected place. Salima's life in Zango continued, defined by the daily struggle for survival. But a subtle shift began to stir beneath the surface. Every day was a reminder of her isolation, but one morning, something changed. A distant voice called her name, a voice that seemed out of place in her world of silence and solitude. It was Kai, a woman whose very presence seemed to shimmer with wealth and mystery. Kai was nothing like the other villagers. She stood tall, her clothes radiant, her jewels catching the light like stars in the sky. She didn't look at Selima with pity, but with something else, something that piqued her curiosity. Kai's arrival in Zango felt like the promise of something new, though Selima couldn't understand exactly what that was. As she watched from a distance, Kai's confident stride and the way she spoke to the villagers intrigued Selima. There was power in her, an aura that seemed to push through the dust and hardship of their everyday lives. Selima couldn't help but wonder, who was this woman, and what was she doing in a place like Zango? Was she just passing through, or did she have a reason to be here? Selima's heart quickened as she realized that this encounter might be the turning point she had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. But even as Kai's presence made Selima feel uneasy, it also sparked a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, something was about to shift in her favor. She had long dreamed of a life beyond the dirt roads and constant labor, but had never imagined that someone like Kai, someone so different, might hold the key to that change. Little did Selima know, this woman would soon become both the answer to her prayers and the source of her greatest trials. The road ahead was not one of smooth transitions, but of dark choices that would test her very soul. It was a hot afternoon when Selima, worn out from another grueling day of chores, made her way down to the river. The water was a rare moment of relief, a brief respite from the unrelenting heat of the village. As she scrubbed the clothes by the water's edge, lost in the repetitive motion, she noticed a figure standing a little farther down the bank. It was Kai. The woman stood out against the stark backdrop of the river, her clothes so fine, so immaculate. They seemed almost out of place in the village. Selima felt a strange pull, an invisible force that drew her attention. Kai stood silently, watching her from a distance, as if waiting for the right moment to approach. Selima's heart raced. She had never spoken to Kai before, but she had seen her from afar, the woman with the graceful movements, the confidence that seemed to command the air around her. And now, here she was, standing just a few feet away. Kai finally took a step forward, her footsteps soft against the riverbank. With a smile that held both warmth and mystery, she introduced herself. And in that moment, Selima's curiosity shifted to something deeper. There was an energy about Kai, an aura that seemed both inviting and dangerous. "I have something to offer you," Kai said, her voice low and smooth like a promise. Selima's confusion grew. Why would someone like Kai offer anything to someone like her? She was used to being ignored, forgotten. Yet Kai's presence demanded attention. "What is it?" Selima asked hesitantly, her heart pounding in her chest. Kai didn't hesitate. She explained that there was a way for Selima to change her life, a way to escape the struggle, the endless cycle of hardship. Kai's offer was simple yet strange. In exchange for a few seemingly insignificant items, old clothes, worn shoes, used undergarments from the village, she would offer Selima a large sum of money. The more Selima took, the more money she would receive. The terms were vague, but the promise of financial freedom, of a life beyond the endless toil, made Selima's mind race. Selima stood there, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of what Kai had just proposed. The offer was like nothing she had ever heard before, both strange and strangely tempting. She looked at the money Kai held out, a sum far greater than any wage she had earned in her lifetime. The temptation was strong, so strong that for a moment, she almost forgot everything she had ever known. Kai's eyes were fixed on hers, and there was something in her gaze that told Selima not to ask too many questions. The way Kai spoke with confidence and an air of knowing something the rest of the world didn't, made Selima feel as though this was her one chance, the break she had longed for. "Don't worry about the details," Kai said, her voice smooth as silk, her smile knowing. "Just collect what I need and your life will change. You'll never have to worry again." It sounded almost too good to be true, yet the promise of a better life was too enticing for Selima to dismiss. For years, she had watched others rise from the ashes of their own hardships, and now, here was her chance to do the same. The money in Kai's hand seemed to shimmer with possibility, and for a brief moment, Selima allowed herself to imagine the life she had always dreamed of, one where hunger didn't gnaw at her belly, where she wasn't invisible to the world around her. Kai's proposal hung in the air between them, and Selima felt a flutter of doubt deep in her chest. But what did she have to lose? Her life was already a constant battle, a fight for survival with no end in sight. What could this strange offer hurt? The choice, though strange, seemed like the only opportunity she had. And so, after a long pause, Selima nodded, her heart pounding in her ears. "I'll do it," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. Kai's smile deepened, her eyes flashing with something Salima couldn't quite place. The deal was made, and Salima was already beginning to wonder what kind of world she had just entered. As Salima walked back home, the weight of her decision settled heavily on her shoulders. The money Kai had given her burned in her hand, a tangible reminder of the choice she had made. Her mind raced with questions, but they seemed unimportant now. For the first time in a long while, there was hope. A glimmer of something better on the horizon. She thought of the money, how it could change everything. She could finally fix her shack, buy new clothes, perhaps even eat a decent meal without worry. The hunger in her stomach, which had always felt like a constant companion, seemed to fade at the thought of the possibilities. She had made the right choice, hadn't she? Yet, despite the promise of wealth and a new life, Salima couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She kept thinking back to Kai's words, "Don't ask too many questions." Why had Kai been so secretive? And why had she chosen Salima, of all people, for this strange task? It didn't make sense, but the allure of change, the escape from her miserable existence, kept her moving forward. She couldn't afford to look back now. The life she had known was nothing but a shadow, and she was determined to step into something brighter, even if the path was unclear. That night, as Salima lay on her straw mat, she couldn't sleep. The questions swirled in her mind, but she buried them, pushing them down as best she could. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of something new. Tomorrow, she would begin her task, and with it, perhaps she could finally escape the shadows of her past. As she closed her eyes, she told herself it was just a matter of time before her life would be unrecognizable, before she could finally join the women of the village, living the life she had always longed for. But as she drifted into a restless sleep, deep down, a small voice whispered, warning her that not all dreams were as sweet as they seemed. Salima wasted no time in putting Kai's plan into action. The money Kai had given her was already spent on colorful buckets and bowls, items that seemed trivial but were the key to the next stage of her transformation. She walked through the village with a sense of purpose, her head held a little higher than usual, though a whisper of doubt still lingered in the back of her mind. At first, the villagers were skeptical. No one understood why she was offering such strange goods in exchange for their old clothing and other discarded items, but as Salima spoke, the warmth in her smile and the gleam of the new things she brought with her soon convinced them. She wasn't like the others. She had something they didn't, and that, it seemed, was enough. As the days went by, Salima's trading became a success. The villagers, who had once ignored her, began to approach her eagerly, swapping their old clothes and shoes for her new, colorful bowls and buckets. They didn't ask where she had gotten them, or why they were suddenly so eager to part with their belongings. They just saw the shiny new items and felt a sense of pride in having something bright and fresh. Slowly, Salima began to accumulate the items Kai had asked for: old clothes, shoes, and most importantly, the undergarments. Each trade, each exchange, felt like a small victory. The once quiet woman who had been invisible in the village was now seen, her presence unmistakable. But the real change came when Salima took the pile of goods to Kai. As she handed over the collected items, Kai's smile grew wider, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. In exchange, Salima received a much larger sum of money than she had ever dreamed of. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to hold real wealth in her hands. With the money, she was able to repair her house, purchase new clothes, and even enjoy the simple pleasure of a full meal. The transformation was almost immediate. Her neighbors couldn't believe their eyes when they saw her new home, her new clothes, her newfound confidence. But there was still a part of Salima that remained in the shadows, a part of her that couldn't forget the strange, mysterious deal she had made. As Salima's life began to transform, so too did the way the villagers saw her. What was once whispered about in the corners of the village became a topic of fascination. Salima, the woman who had once been a mere shadow in the village, now stood out as a figure of mystery and success. Her new home, made from the money she had earned, was brighter, sturdier. Her clothes, once tattered and worn, were now crisp and clean. People who had once turned their backs on her now sought her out, asking how she had achieved such a drastic change. Salima, however, kept the secret close to her chest. She had no intention of revealing the truth behind her newfound wealth, not even to the closest of her neighbors. The money, the clothes, the food, everything had come at a cost, one that she wasn't yet ready to face. In the quiet moments, Salima would look at the money she had earned, still in disbelief at how quickly her life had changed. But each coin was a reminder of the price she had paid. Every time she handed over another sack of clothes or another bundle of goods to Kai, she felt a pang of unease, though it was quickly overshadowed by the thrill of her growing wealth. The world had changed for Salima, but the price of that change felt heavy. As the villagers praised her, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the darkness that had come with her rise. Still, the temptation to continue was undeniable. The promise of more, the promise of a life beyond the hardships she had known, was just too great. By night, Salima met with Kai, the woman who had set everything in motion. Their exchanges, though strange and unsettling, were always accompanied by a growing sense of power. With each meeting, Salima found herself growing more comfortable in this new world, one that seemed to be built on secrecy and shadows. But even as her life became more comfortable, Salima could feel the eyes of the villagers on her, their curiosity turning into suspicion. They whispered about her success, about how a woman who had once been invisible had suddenly risen to prominence, and yet Salima kept her lips sealed, unwilling to share the true nature of her ascent. She had tasted success, and for now, that was all that mattered. As the weeks passed, Salima's success continued to snowball. The villagers began to view her in a new light, their curiosity mixing with awe. They no longer saw her as the poor, invisible woman who struggled to survive. Now she was someone who had defied the odds, someone who had found a way to thrive in a place where most people remained stuck. The other women of the village, who had once looked down on her, now approached her with a new sense of respect, even envy. Salima had something they didn't, an aura of mystery, a secret success that they couldn't quite grasp. But there were moments when Salima caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror, a fleeting reflection that reminded her of the woman she had been, the woman who had lived without hope. And yet, in those moments, Salima pushed the reflection aside. She had come too far to turn back now. The house she had repaired was filled with fresh food, and for the first time she had enough to eat. She wore clothes that no longer made her feel like a ghost, clothes that were as bright and vibrant as the dreams she had once held. Life was better, far better than it had ever been. And still, every night, she met with Kai, trading the items she had collected for money. With each meeting, the exchange became more mysterious, more intense. Salima had stopped asking questions. Kai had made it clear that questions weren't welcome. But even as Salima grew more successful, something inside her began to stir, a feeling that she couldn't ignore. She had begun to wonder, in the quiet hours of the night, what Kai truly wanted with the things she had gathered. She had never seen Kai's true intentions, only the wealth she offered in exchange. It was as though Salima was becoming a part of something much larger than herself, something that was growing darker with each passing day. She felt herself slipping into a world she didn't fully understand, but one that promised to change her life forever. Tinu had always been observant, a quiet presence in the village, but something about Salima's recent behavior didn't sit right with her. She had noticed the strange hours Salima kept, the heavy bags she carried with her, always leaving the village under the cover of night. It wasn't like Salima to be so secretive. Tinu's curiosity grew, and one evening she decided to follow Salima. With a mix of apprehension and determination, Tinu trailed behind, staying out of sight as Salima made her way through the winding paths of the village. She had no idea what she was expecting to find, but her gut told her something was off. When they reached the river, Tinu hid behind a cluster of bushes, watching as Salima approached the water's edge. There, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine. Kai stood waiting for Salima, her figure illuminated by the pale light of the moon. As Salima handed over the bags, Kai's eyes gleamed in the darkness, and Tinu could sense that something far darker was happening. Then, Kai began to do something that filled Tinu with dread. She held up the garments, speaking in a language that Tinu didn't recognize, and began to chant. The air grew thick, heavy with an energy that Tinu couldn't understand, but it was unmistakably sinister. Salima stood there, watching, but there was no question in her eyes. She was no longer just an innocent bystander. Tinu's breath caught in her throat as she saw Kai hold the items over a flame, muttering incantations. The items, what had once been discarded pieces of clothing, seemed to vanish, disintegrating into nothingness. Tinu's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the ritual before her wasn't just about trading goods for money. It was something much darker, something that no one in the village could have ever imagined. Tinu quickly pulled away, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. What had Salima gotten herself into? And more importantly, what did Kai want with those items? Tinu returned home that night in a daze, her mind haunted by the image of Kai standing by the river, performing that strange, dark ritual. She couldn't sleep, her thoughts racing. What did the chant mean? What was Kai doing with the items, the clothes, the undergarments Salima had been collecting? Her mind couldn't make sense of it, but one thing was clear. Salima was caught in something far more dangerous than she had realized. Tinu knew she couldn't keep this to herself. The village had to know what was really happening. The elders needed to be informed before things spiraled even further. The next day, with a heavy heart, Tinu went to the village council. She couldn't shake the image of Kai, and she couldn't shake the fear that had begun to settle deep in her bones. She told the council about what she had seen, about the ritual at the river, about the way Kai had used the garments in her strange ceremony. The elders listened quietly, their faces grave. They exchanged whispers and fearful glances. They had heard rumors of dark magic before, of strange happenings in the village, but they had never seen it firsthand. Now, with Tinu's account, they understood that something malevolent was at work. After the meeting, the village elder, a wise but weathered man named Baba Ghani, summoned Salima. She arrived at the council's meeting place, her posture rigid, her face wary. She knew deep down that this moment was coming. The villagers had been whispering about her transformation, about the sudden wealth and power that had come into her life, but she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the confrontation. The room was filled with the weight of her secrets, and as Baba Ghani spoke, his voice steady but filled with authority, Salima felt her world begin to crumble. "Salima," Baba Ghani said, his voice low, "the villagers have seen the changes in you, but we know there's more behind them. Tinu has told us what she witnessed at the river. We need you to tell us the truth. What have you gotten yourself involved in?" Salima's heart raced, panic surging through her. She wanted to deny it, to lie, but the truth clawed at her throat. The secrecy, the money, it all came at a cost that she could no longer ignore. Salima stood before the council, her hands trembling, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Baba Ghani's eyes bore into hers. She could feel the weight of the villagers' gaze on her, the judgment in the air. For a moment, she thought of denying everything, of claiming ignorance and distancing herself from the dark truth, but there was no escaping it. The guilt was suffocating, the shame too much to bear. She had been a part of something much darker than she had ever anticipated, and now it was too late to pretend otherwise. With a deep breath, Salima spoke, her voice shaky at first, then growing firmer with each word. I didn't know at first. I thought it was just a way to get ahead, a chance to live a better life," she began, her words stumbling over each other. "Kai offered me money in exchange for collecting things from the village, things that didn't seem important, old clothes, used items. She said it was nothing, just a simple exchange." Her voice broke, and for a brief moment she looked away, unable to meet the eyes of the villagers. But then I saw what she was doing with them. She used them in rituals. Dark rituals. She uses the things I brought her to take the souls of the villagers, to steal their fortunes. A hush fell over the room. The villagers were stunned, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. Baba Ghani's expression darkened, but his voice remained calm. "This is grave, Salima. You have brought great harm to the village. We must act swiftly." Salima felt the weight of her actions crash down upon her. She had been so desperate for a better life, so consumed by the idea of escaping the crushing poverty, that she hadn't seen the true nature of what she was doing. Now the very people she had once longed to be a part of were turning their backs on her. And yet, a part of her understood. She had participated in something that no one could forgive. The villagers, once her peers, now looked at her with fear and disgust. I never meant for this to happen," Salima whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know it would come to this. I thought I was just making a trade. I didn't know what she was really after." The villagers, shaken by Salima's revelation, gathered in a hurried assembly under the guidance of Baba Ghani. The weight of what they had learned hung heavily in the air. Kai had manipulated not just Salima, but the entire village. The realization was enough to fuel their fear and anger. They knew that something had to be done to rid Zango of the curse that Kai had brought upon them. Baba Ghani, wise as he was, had seen the signs of dark magic before, but never on this scale. He knew that it wasn't enough to simply confront Kai. No, they would need to fight, to destroy her power completely. With a heavy heart, Baba Ghani gathered a group of elders and the strongest villagers to perform a sacred ritual to confront Kai. The plan was simple. They would march to the river, where Kai had carried out her dark ceremonies, and confront her in the heart of her power. They would break the spell, banish the evil, and purify their village once and for all. But Baba Ghani knew that this would not be an easy task. Kai was powerful, and the magic she wielded was not to be taken lightly. They needed the strength of their ancestors, the protection of their gods, to succeed. As the group marched toward the river, Salima walked behind them, her heart heavy with guilt. She had been the one to bring this curse upon the village. She had been the one to unknowingly fuel Kai's dark power. She wasn't sure if she could ever be forgiven for what she had done, but she was determined to help right the wrongs she had caused. Her body ached as they neared the river, the memories of her own dealings with Kai flooding back. The river, once a place of simple work, now felt like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in her life. But she couldn't turn back. When they arrived, Kai was waiting, her figure standing tall and regal in the center of the riverbank. She smiled at the villagers, her eyes gleaming with arrogance. She knew what they had come for. "You think you can stop me?" she said, her voice filled with dark amusement. I have already taken what I need. You are too late. Kai's laughter echoed across the river, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers. But Baba Gani remained resolute. He stepped forward, raising his hands to the sky, invoking the ancient spirits of the village. We will not stand idly by while you destroy what is ours, Kai, he declared, his voice strong, unwavering. The other villagers gathered around him, their faces set with determination. The ritual was about to begin. Baba Gani chanted the sacred words, his voice growing louder with each syllable. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the wind picked up, swirling around them. Kai, sensing the power of the ritual, narrowed her eyes. For a moment, it seemed as though the world stood still. The air was thick with tension, and the villagers could feel the weight of the ancient magic coming alive. Kai's power, once so confident and overwhelming, began to falter. The ground around her cracked, the river churning as if fighting back against her. Salima, standing at the edge of the group, watched in a mixture of fear and awe. She had seen Kai's power firsthand, but now, as the ritual unfolded, she realized just how dangerous the forces they were dealing with truly were. Kai had grown too powerful, too consumed by her own greed, and yet, there was something in Salima's heart, something stronger than the fear, that urged her to keep moving forward, to help bring an end to this madness. Kai's calm facade began to crack. Her eyes, once filled with confidence, now flickered with uncertainty. You cannot destroy me, she hissed, her voice filled with venom. I have taken what I need, and your pathetic magic cannot undo what I've done. But the villagers pressed on, their chants growing louder, their voices rising in unison as they called upon the spirits to break Kai's hold over them. The sky darkened and the wind howled, the power of the ritual building to its peak. Then, with a final, powerful incantation, Baba Gani's voice rang out, clear and strong. The earth beneath their feet trembled violently, and for a moment everything went silent. And then, as if struck by a bolt of lightning, Kai's power shattered. The magic that had been wrapped around her, that had held the village in its grip, unraveled. Kai let out a final scream, her body writhing in agony as the ritual took its toll. In a burst of light, her form crumbled to dust, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her laughter, now silenced forever. With the destruction of Kai's dark power, the river fell silent. The eerie energy that had once hung in the air slowly dissipated, leaving behind only the calm whispers of the wind. The villagers stood in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. It was over. Kai, the source of the curse, was no more. Yet, despite the victory, the sense of relief was bittersweet. The cost had been high, higher than any of them had anticipated. Salima, who had once been a part of this darkness, now felt the weight of her actions crushing her from within. She had been freed from Kai's influence, but at what cost? Her body, weakened by her involvement in the dark magic, trembled with the after effects of the ritual. Her legs, once strong, now ached with an unbearable pain. She had participated in something far beyond what she could have ever understood, and now she was paying the price. As the villagers began to murmur among themselves, some expressed relief, while others couldn't hide their anger. The fact remained that Salima had played a crucial role in the dark magic that had cursed them all. The villagers had seen her rise from nothing, and they had watched her fall. Now they looked at her with a mix of fear and contempt. She had done what she could to undo the damage, but there was no turning back from the path she had walked. The priestess had been destroyed, but the scars remained, both in the village and in Salima's heart. Tinu, however, was different. She approached Salima, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. You were deceived, she said softly, her voice steady. We all have our demons to face. But you have paid the price. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Salima looked up at Tinu, her eyes filled with tears of guilt. I never meant to bring harm to anyone, she whispered. But I've done so much damage. How can they ever forgive me? Tinu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Forgiveness is a long road, Salima, but it's a road worth walking. You have to start by forgiving yourself. The story of Salima's rise and fall spread throughout the village. Some believed she was beyond redemption, while others, like Tinu, saw the pain in her eyes and offered what little comfort they could. The village, forever scarred by the events, began the slow process of healing, and so did Salima. She would live with the consequences of her choices for the rest of her life. But as the years passed, her story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the high price of power and the heavy cost of desperation. The name of Salima was no longer spoken with contempt, but with a quiet reverence. She had lived a life defined by darkness, but in the end, she sought the light. Her journey was one of redemption, and though she had lost much, she had found something far more valuable: her own humanity. Thank you so much for watching. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment with your country and city. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future videos. We've got more stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss them. Stay connected, and we'll see you in the next one.